Hi, I'm Ray. At the beginning of 2024, I was around 42 pounds or more, I think about 46 pounds in total. Yeah, 46 pounds heavier than I am now. And I am only 156 centimeters tall, or that's 5'1.5" roughly. 5'1.5" 156 centimeters. So 46 pounds is represents a significant percentage of my body. Yeah, so like it's each pound is a bit different when you're short than when you're tall, and each pound represents like big. So that was a lot for me to lose, and I lost it very quickly in a couple of months, and I lost most of it very quickly, and then I actually lost like the last few pounds only a little while ago, and which isn't even really like necessary. Like I was fine already, but I certainly stopped being overweight fairly quickly, and it was the first time I'd ever been overweight. I had been over fat. I had a very poor body composition. My whole childhood, always terrible body composition. I'm actually getting genetically tested for Temple syndrome, which has a range of multi-system symptoms, and I might have that as the reason why my bones are super light and narrow, and like my long bones are super short and narrow. So like I'm gonna weigh less for my height than most people if I'm healthy, I think, which would explain why when I was just overweight. I was only classed as just overweight, and yet it didn't look just overweight. Like I already looked obese, and like not just my opinion. Like not anyone said that word to me specifically, but I got feedback afterwards that some family members had made some like just joking comments to each other, like whoa, like about like how certain parts of me had just suddenly become huge, and like it was just amusing to them. They weren't trying to be mean, but like people noticed. It was enough. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just a bit overweight. Like even though by BMI I was just a bit overweight, I actually by eating suddenly deciding I was just going to eat a load, which is another story. The exact story is not even relevant. Basically, I started eating a lot more consistently, and it was all ultra processed, as most of my diet had been, and most people's are without knowing it. And I just kept eating, and I gained it really quickly, and then I lost it really quickly because I started to get crippling endometriosis-like symptoms. To get properly diagnosed, in my case, I would need the surgery, and it's not worth it. So I have other ways of dealing with the symptoms. But the pain, the constant, every day, not just sometimes a month, every single day pain, got crippling. And other things were happening. I was physically so uncomfortable because my boobs were suddenly resting on my belly. Like I don't have a big chest, and but it got bigger, but still to be resting on my belly, that was a new sensation, and it wouldn't normally happen if you were only just a bit overweight. So again, I think BMI just doesn't work for my weird bones, my tiny weird small bones, and my excessive, like another part of Temple syndrome is not gaining muscle easily. So you've got almost no bone and no muscle compared to other people at your height, and your body just likes to get fat and not have muscle or bone. But that means that my minimum health is going to be like, it's not going to necessarily meet the same measurements as someone who has a more typical skeleton and hormone profile where I don't know if it's hormones currently or in the womb. But anyway, regardless, I started to realize, oh God, this is very physically uncomfortable. And yeah, I felt the sweatiness, and things were rubbing that didn't used to rub. And I couldn't walk up the stairs without being out of breath. And everything, it was uncomfortable just to lie down or sit down because of how things were like resting and rubbing up against each other that didn't used to, and it was causing friction and sweat and various other things. Basically, I decided, and I got it was the end of December. I think it was like, it might have been like the 30th of December. It was really late when I got my test results back that said that I was overweight, by BMI, which I think for me, I was way more than just overweight, but I was overweight and I had triglycerides were bad, my cholesterol was bad, all for the first time ever, and I might have been a couple of other things I don't remember. And it was very suddenly, I gained weight. I was overweight for the first time, and within months, and I personally immediately got high cholesterol from it. And I think that is also part of Temple syndrome, is that you are very prone to cholesterol problems. You're prone to wanting to overeat in the first place. It's not guaranteed, but there is a strong connection to central obesity, particularly with Temple syndrome. I said, I don't know for sure I have it, but basically, my cholesterol, for whatever reason, I didn't get the grace period most people get, where they can be overweight for a long time. As soon as I became overweight, even according to BMI, I hadn't been overweight that long. Probably by the time I got tested, I'd been gaining weight, but I was not that overweight, and yet, boom, I get high cholesterol and triglycerides are bad. So my body is not that forgiving of me, and I decided to lose the weight. But the main motive, honestly, when I first changed my diet, wasn't about the weight loss. That was like a sort of afterthought, really. The real thing that was bothering me was I had to be put on these pills to stop the contraceptive pill to help massively reduce the extreme pain I was in from probably endometriosis. Is what it probably is based on symptoms and stuff, but it's hard to confirm that for me without surgery. And they gave me the contraceptive pill gave me intense mood swings, like insane. And I couldn't live like that. But it did help it really brought the pain down to like, okay, I don't even need painkillers every day anymore. Like most days I don't even need painkillers now. So I needed to be on that pill, but it was giving me mood swings, and I knew from past experience, which I will probably talk about in another video, that intermittent fasting is really good for your mood, and I thought maybe I'll try that, and it will also help me lose the weight that I've just gained, and that might help. If it is endometriosis, losing that extra fat will change my hormone profile and help the endometriosis and my inflammatory, especially. Endometriosis has an inflammatory component, so yeah. And then I discovered, like almost immediately after going into intermittent fasting and updating my knowledge about that, I came across this ultra processed food sort of latest consensus in the scientific field, consensus among the ones that aren't like regulatory bodies that have long been known to have been bought off, like the World Health Organization, Harvard, I think Oxford and or Cambridge, and multiple governments around the world all officially they're like, oh yeah, we now agree ultra processed food is the cause of the modern obesity-related health epidemics. The obesity itself, because of it, causes the overeating, and all of the other stuff that we attribute to obesity, but might actually just be kind of correlating with it because of the ultra-processed food. That is the real cause of why in the 1900s onwards, suddenly different parts of the world would have these explosions of obesity, or a gradual increase. It would depend on how gradually the ultra processed food crept into their diet. If it happened really suddenly, there'd be a massive overnight, basically explosion of everyone's got diabetes and is morbidly obese. In America and the UK, where it happened earlier, it happened more slowly. So people were slowly getting bigger and bigger. And then in Brazil, they did this big study. They've done studies. Latin America was leading the charge on this because they had the recent explosion of ultra processed food that led to these very dramatic, sudden, everyone is suddenly big in this town, and then the next town, and then the next town, and they traced it to, every time this mobile food company goes there with those ultra-processed food, which we now call it that's when suddenly everyone suddenly began to overeat and get obese when they were buying food ready-made, convenience food, and they studied, well, what's in this food that makes it different to the food that the people were eating before, and in general, what's the difference between what people eat in big times and places versus times and places where you have abundant food. It's not fair to compare it to places where, like, if you don't have enough food, but like where food is abundant for the vast majority of people, and anyone could in theory get fat because they've all got enough access to food. What makes one place and time where, at least in any given, a community, say like the upper classes within a country, even if the rest of them are not having abundant food. You could go back in time and look at where the whole upper class had still a small rate of obesity. It was a small rate, even though they all had as much food as they could want. They still didn't overeat en masse. Like, only a small percentage would get overweight, and that small percentage didn't get that overweight as compared to today, and they didn't seem to all have untreated diabetes complications as you'd expect. Even the biggest ones that were overweight for their whole lives, you don't really, there was no documents of why are these people not going blind and having gangrene and stuff at the rate that overweight people do in the modern era of obesity, where it's much more common. Well, it's because they were getting overweight on real food, and it's this ultra-processed stuff that's not real food and isn't food at all anymore. It's sort of ex-food. It was food that got contaminated and ruined and turned into non-food, edible, food-like substances and mismarketed as food. That's when suddenly obesity was associated with all these other things, dementia risk and heart attack, stroke, diabetes. Even it's not really a sugar, because if it was the sugar, it would have been prevalent hundreds of years when people were eating things with a lot of sugar in. So basically, that was how I discovered the concept, and I want to explain what that actually means. So I'm going to link in the description the scientific formal definition written about by one of the person who actually coined it, Monteiro. I'm not entirely sure how he pronounces that name, I'm sorry, but the scientific formal definition, I'm going to link a couple of things about that to what we mean by ultra processed food. It's not like, and why people shouldn't mix up the terms. It's really confusing for everyone when people use processed and ultra processed interchangeably, because the chemical transformations and physical transformations that are made when a chef, when the normal traditional process before the obesity and mass health problems epidemic happened, those processes obviously didn't cause it, because otherwise all those people who had abundant access to all that food would have also had those problems, and they didn't. And to this day, in places where everyone is eating in only ingredients that come from traditional means, pre-1900s inventions of chemicals, and basically anything made by a chef, and any chemical transformation that the farmer or the chef or the chef being you if you cook at home, or your cook if you have a cook, or whatever it was throughout history and time, if the person who is like a chef, a cook in a domestic normal kitchen makes a chemical transformation, it's been shown that like that kinds of food doesn't cause people to overeat and get dementia and get depression and anxiety at these high rates that we have wherever ultra-processed food goes. It's the chemical processes that a chemist does in a chemical lab or a chemical factory. Basically, the really simple rule of thumb, because there's a really long, complicated list of all the things that count as ultra-processed, which I will link. And that's what the scientists, that's what they identified when they studied this phenomenon in Latin America. And then everyone started to get involved in this research and doing experiments comparing like for like clean, minimally processed, meaning the traditional real food, pizza, chocolate, whatever they were giving people, like traditional real pizza, real chocolate, and then the ultra processed stuff that is normalized in fat countries. So frozen pizza, mass-produced, you could freeze your own pizza and that won't count. You know what I mean? Like supermarket, mass-produced, mass-distributed pizza that has to be filled with all these chemicals to make it profitable to sell it to people. Otherwise, they could make it themselves cheaper. And in some cases, you actually can. You just don't know that you can make it cheaper. But pizza is one of those that can be a bit more expensive to make it yourself, because you're going to be using real ingredients only and not these chemicals that they can pump out once they bought the equipment, pump out these chemicals are really cheaply compared to real food, which is expensive to buy from a farmer because it's labor intensive, hard work growing real food. So that's expensive compared to these chemicals that they make once they bought the expensive equipment. They very quickly get that returned back by mass producing and mass sending what they call food, and we now know is not. It's calorific, but so is alcohol, and alcohol is not classed as a food. Just because it's got calories and technically stops you starving to death doesn't make it food, just like alcohol isn't food just because it would stop you starving. It still kills you. And so this is the same. This kills you. It stops you starving to death, but it's killing you in other ways. It's like alcohol, like all this ultra-processed stuff. It's basically non-food in the way that alcohol is non-food, I think. And legally, I think it should be treated that way. And it should be seen as... But at least alcohol makes you feel good. This doesn't even do that. So... I mean, compared to real food, it doesn't make you feel... It makes you feel worse. Like, you enjoy it just as much as that's been proven. It doesn't taste any better. But then afterwards, you feel worse, and in every way, of course, your life goes down. Alcohol at least gives you a high that you don't get from, like, real food. But real food versus ultra-processed food, it's no comparison. It doesn't even give you any benefit except the convenience. I don't have to cook. I don't have to bake. I can buy a packet of potato snacks like potato crisps or potato chips, whatever it's called in your country. So like whether you're talking about like fries or potato crisps, make your own. That I'm gonna make a video about that, what I do, like to make my own chocolate, make my own real crisps, real potato snacks, and how I lost weight by eating whatever I want. All the favorite foods, I just make clean, minimally processed ones instead of buying the ones riddled with these chemical concoctions from a laboratory or a factory. That is the rule of thumb I want to get across. You can read the explanation of what ultra-processed food is, and it's very long and complicated, and we don't know which of the chemicals, in every case we know some of them, which ones are actually messing up the gut bacteria that makes you overeat and makes you have all these other problems, because gut bacteria control everything. We didn't know that for a long time, but they drive your mental health, your hormones. Ultimately, like, if you mess up your gut bacteria balance, it will mess up every system in your body. It has a chain reaction, and including satiety, your ability to feel full when you've had enough calories that should have been detected in the gut but are not, because your gut bacteria are all messed up from your recent diet, because it changes fairly quickly. But your recent diet will determine like how full you feel, and that's what these experiments have shown. Your recent diet of how many things made by a chemist were in your gut versus how many things made by a chef or a cook. If something's made by a chef or a cook, it doesn't make you overweight and sick. And give you dementia and give you depression and anxiety and diabetes and stroke and heart attack and all these other inflammatory conditions. It doesn't do that or make them worse. It doesn't do that if it's a chemical ingredient made by a chef. But if it's made by a chemist, which didn't exist until the obesity crisis suddenly started to exist all over the place and spread around the world, perfectly correlating with the ultra-processed running around the world, then, you know, that's one of the reasons it's like established fact now, unless you are massively paid off, like the USD, whatever it was, I don't know, the American one that's massively bought off. Most of the organizations around the world that actually have a true motive and are not like lobbied and sponsored by big ultra processed food, then they're all like, oh yeah, this is really obvious now. How did we miss this? Like, and I don't know how they missed it, because you look around the world and it's obvious, like, macros don't matter. The French and the Italians would eat loads of carbs, and they were slim until very recently, and they're still more slim than others. And you've got other countries that are also, you know, rich and have enough access to food, and they're slim by not eating so many carbs, but eating more fat or more protein. And all these different cultures around the world who have abundant food and stay slim, they don't all have the same macro profile. So it's the idea that obesity was caused by, like, oh, you've got to get your carb balance right, your fat, carb, protein. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that the food you eat isn't full of things made by a chemist instead of made by a chef. That is how I lost the weight and kept it off. More importantly, I could have lost the weight any other way, but I don't think I would have kept it off, because I would have wanted to overeat again. And because I was, as I said, I'm now smaller than I used to be before I lost the weight. I had a bad body composition, and it's tough for me to get a good body composition. I'm trying to do exercise to help with that. I didn't do at first. That's a more recent thing, because I realised I had a little bit of like loose skin, because I lost it so quickly without any exercise whatsoever. And then I was like, oh, that might have been a mistake, because now I've got like these podgy parts which can't be fat. And my BMI, they can't be fat. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because the rest of me looks a lot thinner than these parts. It's like, that's empty fat cells. Like, you grew new fat cells because you outgrew the ones you'd already had, grew new fat cells, and those don't disappear, they just empty out normally. So I'm hoping that just doing like lots of muscle training will make that less visible, and maybe they do get eaten if you force your body to eat them. I don't know, but it's not too bad right now. It's a lot better, and it's all my. Shall I show you? So literally show you my soft white underbelly. See this? It's not perfect. It looks great when I'm standing upright. But as soon as I sit down, or it depends on what I'm wearing, obviously. But you can see like there's wrinkles here. It's very unfortunate because like in some angle, if I stand upright, I actually look like I've got a nice toned belly. It really depends on how I'm sitting, and that's unfortunate because it makes me think I can try an outfit on and think like a midriff showing outfit, and I look great all the time I'm standing in the mirror. As soon as I sit down, instant muffin top, and like wrinkles, like, and that's the typical loose skin look you get when you've lost weight. So there's proof for you that I have lost the weight in case you were doubting it. You don't get that look unless you've lost weight. So yeah, hopefully I can get that to look a lot better however I sit and whatever I'm wearing. Yeah, I didn't do any exercise at first, and I just ate, like, I didn't reduce fat, carbs, none of that. I just ate a lot less, and I was able to eat less because I wasn't getting these cravings, these crazy cravings all the time. And I only ate once a day, which I personally prefer. I don't think that's necessary. It depends on the person. Some people find that helpful, some don't. I found it helpful because if you're not eating anything that's anything that you buy, right? You're buying the raw ingredients to make your own food, including bread, crisps, chocolate. If you want to eat those things, you make it yourself, or you go to somewhere that makes it also with traditional methods with no like chemist made ingredients. So you go to maybe a bakery that actually does freshly baked bread from just like 4 ingredients and not like any industrial chemicals made in a lab. Only food that would have existed before chemists started getting involved in food production. So yeah, you make all that yourself. It's much easier if you only eat once a day. Then it's really hard if you eat more than once a day to like consistently cook everything yourself, although you can get better with practice and strategic thinking over time, and then you learn like, what am I happy to eat a lot of, like, every day for a while, like what is not boring to me. And my method, I will maybe talk about this in another video going into like how I manage to make it work. How do I keep consistently cooking and baking my own food and all that stuff. But basically, if I found that having one meal a day meant that I wasn't like having to worry about it most of the day. And and there are benefits for some people to do intermittent fasting as well. So, but it's not necessary. To lose weight and to be healthy, that's the most important part, is your overall health. Honestly, the weight loss, I like it because I feel so much more comfortable and more mobile and everything else. And I personally like how I look this way better, but that's subjective. Like, you might not, and that's the really important part is how I feel so much healthier. I feel like I'm glowing now. Like, my skin is so much better. My psoriasis has gone away. In certain parts of me anyway, like the skin's gone a lot better, and yeah, I feel like I just look and feel so much healthier, and a lot of other things that I was dealing with have got better, because so much of health is at least made worse and sometimes just caused by what you're eating. And my mood much more stable. That was the whole reason I started in the first place. And I was just going to do the fasting, and then I learned that just removing ultra processed food does the same stuff, and then if you do both together, it's a double whammy of the benefits. But just removing ultra processed food, and I should say replacing it with all homemade food that is made the way people made it when nobody had like a widespread obesity crisis, when obesity was something that some people with medical oddities about them, or maybe an unusual psychology or something about them that made them like unusual, they would always be overweight. And but the explosion, like where everyone is suddenly really struggling not to overeat, where suddenly overeating is suddenly something that everyone struggles with, at least a little, or most people struggle to not overeat. That's a new thing in the 1900s, and spread into parts of the world, and there are still parts of the world it hasn't happened yet, and we can study those and compare them, and it's brilliant that we can do that. And that's what the result has been, is that it's replacing whatever you like to eat. There is a clean, minimally processed version. If you love all the fattiest pizzas full of salt, you can, like, that's fine. It doesn't matter how fatty and salty it is, because if your gut bacteria are healthy because they're not being poisoned by artificial chemicals made in a lab by a chemist instead of by a chef in a kitchen, then your gut bacteria will mean that you, assuming that you don't have a rare genetic problem, you will feel full when you've had enough calories. That's been proven now in this experiment I'm going to link as well, that you will feel full. So if you have this really fatty pizza, you will feel full when you've had enough calories from it, and then you'll be like, okay, I'm going to have the rest another time, because you'll feel full. You won't just eat and eat and eat. You will feel full. So it won't even matter how fatty the pizza is and how many calories are in it. You will just stop when you've had enough calories. And it's only if you get the ones, if you have been eating a bunch of stuff in the last few days, which ruins your gut bacteria, that's when you're going to overeat on pizza. So it's having pizza and everything else that is clean, meaning the way people used to only have access to food. They only had food made by a chef in a sort of traditional kitchen methods all around the world, and they didn't have access to stuff made by a chemist in a newfangled chemical factory. We didn't have that stuff in our gut for any of our evolution. We had, like, all of it was stuff that evolved on the planet with us, that we're all all species on this planet kind of genetically related. And so a lot of the things we eat are fine for us because they're coming from plants and things that evolved on the same planet as us. It kind of makes sense, right? So, but these chemicals, we didn't evolve with any of that. That's got no, and it's not that all of them will be bad, but we know some of them are bad. We don't know all of the ins and outs of which ones are actually fine and which ones, we can't study every single one of them. There's so many that have been introduced to the mass convenience food. What we can do is say, we know that collectively, when you eat stuff that's got chemicals in, that's been made by a chemist instead of a chef, that sort of thing, we know that at least some of it is having these effects. So just don't have stuff made that way, like buy your cocoa butter, cacao powder, pure with no additives in a packet, and that way it's not got artificial chemicals in. It's been powdered, cacao powder, just mechanically powderized. It's easier to have someone do that for you with a machine than to go and buy the machine yourself. And it is just a traditional method people were eating chocolate long before ultra processing existed, and they didn't get fat on it. And so we know that the cacao powder is fine. Make cacao powder, coconut milk powder. That's how I make chocolate. And cacao butter and honey as the sweetness. And then I like to put like raisins and cashews in there and make raisin and nut chocolate bars or chocolate whatever, all kinds of chocolate I've made, and it's delicious. It's actually delicious, and there are nothing in it has been made by a chemist, because I made sure the raw ingredients I bought were just like pure, like one ingredient, like the cacao butter, nothing else, the cocoa cacao powder, nothing else, the honey, just pure honey, and that's what I mean when I say, like, if you buy these raw ingredients that you're going to cook and bake with, and just make sure that it hasn't had some weird chemical ingredient on it that is clearly not something that grows from the ground, but is made in a lab. Don't put things in your body, apart from medication that's designed very specifically for a certain illness, that it might be worth it, because it's the alternative of not taking it is worse. Food is not like that. You don't have to put anything artificial that was invented in the 1900s into your body, which hasn't evolved to handle all of that stuff. And it's just basically breaking out of ultra processed food culture. I'm going to do another video on that as well. It means breaking out of the habit of thinking that you have to rely on corporations to make everything for you, and realizing that you can make your own chocolate, and you don't, and all of basically, and it's realizing that real food is not made by a chemist in a chemical factory or a chemical lab. Real food comes from a farm. It goes to maybe a retailer for storage, and then it comes to you or someone else who cooks it in a kitchen. Real food only has those parts. It does not have a chemical factory involved. It doesn't have a chemist in a laboratory coat involved. Those people should not be involved. If they are, it's not food anymore. It's not. It's a chemistry experiment.